make our chocolate chip meringues, we'll need 4 egg whites, and we're going to use previously frozen egg whites. We'll need salt, cream of tartar, vanilla extract, and we're going to use pure vanilla extract for that boost of vanilla flavor. We'll need granulated sugar and semi-sweet chocolate chips, and we're going to use mini chocolate chips because they stay suspended in the batter better. The equipment needed to make our meringues, you could whisk them, but that would take an awful lot of energy and arm strength. So we're going to use a stand mixer. You could get by with a hand mixer if you didn't own a stand mixer, but I would definitely suggest an electric mixer. We're going to use the whisk attachment for our stand mixer. We'll need the bowl for the mixer, and then we also need a dry measuring cup for the sugar. We want to double check the amount of our egg whites with a liquid measuring cup, and then we'll need a measuring spoon for salt, vanilla, cream of tartar. The chocolate chips we have the bag size that we need, so we won't need to measure those, but we will need a straight edge spatula and rubber scraper, and then I have a cookie scoop for helping to portion the meringues onto the baking pan. With what you see in the background there is a silpat, so you could use parchment paper, but a silpat is an alternative to parchment paper that can be washed and reused. So that's the equipment that we'll need to make our meringues. Before I start to mix anything together, I want to get all of my ingredients measured and ready to go. So I need 1 cup of granulated sugar, and I can scoop that right up in the cup, measuring cup, so that it heaps over. Then I'm going to level it off. We'll set that aside. Our salt and our cream of tartar go in at the same time, so we can put them in the same custard cup. And I need a 1/4 teaspoon of each. So there's a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar, and then I also need a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and for the vanilla I want 1 to measure over and 1 to hold in case I pour past the spoon. Remember, liquid should bubble at the edge. And a little bit over. So there's my holding. I have my chocolate chips with the top cut so that they're ready to add. And then I want to get a 1/2 cup of egg whites to make sure that I have the right amount. So 4 egg whites equal a 1/2 cup. Get down to eye level to double check that. So now we have all of our ingredients measured and ready to go. Starting out in the bowl with my egg whites, salt, and cream of tartar. And I'm going to beat that on a low speed. I'm going to add my vanilla here in just a minute. And I'm going to beat this until soft peaks form. I'm going to go ahead and add my vanilla. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to beat this until soft peaks form. A soft peak is defined when you turn your whisk upside down, the peaks are just starting to hold. They're soft, and so they melt back onto themselves. They curl back over onto themselves after a second. So that's a soft peak. Now, this is going to be These meringues are made with your probably most common meringue. A little more speed here on the mixer. There we go. A French meringue is the most basic or common meringue. Egg whites are whipped until they have soft peaks. At this stage, some of the sugar is added to the whites, and then they're whipped until they reach firm peaks. Then the rest of the sugar is added, either folded or whipped according to recipe directions. French meringues must be baked to keep them from breaking down. Typically, they are baked in a low temperature oven, and it's for a long time, depending on the structure, but it's a low temperature oven. Now, a Swiss meringue is different. A Swiss meringue starts by combining egg whites with all of the sugar and mixing it over a boiling water until it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that hot mixture is whipped into firm peaks. Because it's cooked over that boiling water, basically, Swiss meringue is more stable than a French meringue. And then the third type of meringue is an Italian meringue, and it's prepared starting with a hot sugar and water syrup. The hot syrup is slowly poured into the egg whites as they're beaten at high speeds using an electric mixer. And since that hot syrup cooks the egg whites, the Italian meringue is the most stable meringue. So we've got some nice bubbles. We're going to pause this for just a minute and take a peek. You can see it's just a lot of bubbles. It's just foamy. So what happens is more bubbles are created, but they get smaller and more refined as the peaks become more defined. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to, like I said, we're going to take this to a soft peak, and then we're going to gradually add our sugar, 1 tablespoon, about every 5 seconds until the meringue is stiff and glossy, and that'll take us about 1.5 minutes. So we'll continue with this until we get to soft peaks. So now I've paused my mixer to check the formation of the peaks, and it does curl back over, but we've got much smaller bubbles. So we're going to go ahead and start adding that sugar a little bit at a time while the mixer's running. So again, you could do this with a hand mixer. It would be basically the same. It would probably stay on a higher speed though, because they don't have as many to pick from as the stand mixers typically do. So it's about a tablespoon. Sprinkle that in. And it's just about every 5 seconds. Just enough to help the previous tablespoon get mixed in. And this should get us to a firm peak so that when we turn our whisk upside down, the peaks hold and our ridges are more distinct, but our tips will still fold back. So just slowly until all of our sugar is added, and then we'll check the peak formation again. So at this point, I've added all my sugar. You can see it's a lot more glossy, but the peaks really fall pretty easily. So this needs a little more mixing time. We're going to go ahead and lock that in place, the mixer in place, so it doesn't come up. And we're going to go for a higher speed to really incorporate some air into that meringue mixture. Okay, so as this beats, we're going to go ahead and go to a stiff peak stage. So firm was when I turned the whisk upside down and they hold, the ridges are more distinct, but the tips fold back. A stiff peak You turn the whisk upside down, and those peaks hold up proudly. They stand, they point straight up without collapsing. If anything, just a little tiny curl at the very tip. But our mixture at that point should be thick and heavy. Although we do have to be careful to make sure that we do not overbeat our egg white mixture. It is possible to do it. It's past the stiff peak stage. The egg whites, they start to look grainy, they lose their shine, they get dull. Eventually they'll collapse back on themselves. And then the same thing would happen if we were working with whipped cream. It would also get grainy, and it would start to separate into fat and to liquid. So we have to get this just right. We're going to pause and look at our mixture again. So I really like the way that looks in the bowl, the way that peak stands up there. And see, it's just a little curl at the top, but it really has a lot of hold. Maybe just a little bit more. But before we do that, we're going to take our rubber scraper, go around the edges of the bowl, make sure that any granules of sugar that didn't get mixed in get knocked down in there so they get mixed into the egg white sugar mixture. It's also important to note that anytime you're mixing egg whites, it should be in a metal or glass bowl, never plastic. Plastic is too close to fat and chemical construction. And even a drop of fat in the egg whites would have prevented them from creating this meringue, from foaming properly. Now that I've stopped this again, you can see that the peak is really holding its point. So we're going to call this done. And I'm going to clean out the whisk attachment and get all that mixture back into the mixing bowl. Because the next thing we have to do is fold in our chocolate chips. So we'll loosen that from the mixer. Push that out of our way. And we're going to sprinkle our chocolate chips so that they're all around the bowl. And as I mentioned before, I like the minis because they stay suspended better in the meringue mixture. And we're going to fold, which means we're going to cut down through the middle, come up the bottom, up across the bottom, up the side, and fold over. And then we turn it a quarter turn. Cut down through the middle, across the bottom, up the side, fold. And this is just so that we gently incorporate those chocolate chips throughout this entire mixture. Scrape the sides occasionally. Once they seem to be distributed evenly, then we're finished. So just a few more turns around the bowl here, I think. And we'll have them good to go. Alright, so there's our chocolate chips mixed into our meringue that we made. So now we have to portion our cookies onto our baking pan with our Silpat, or you could use parchment paper. I just like these, they are reusable. So we're going to make about 30 cookies, and I like the cookie scoop because it helps to keep them all the same size, which helps them to bake evenly. But you could use 2 spoons or a spoon and a rubber scraper. So I'm going to put 2 pans in the oven, so I'm going to try to get 15 cookies on each cookie sheet. So I'm going to start with one in the middle, and I'm going to go for 3 rows of 5 on each cookie sheet. Now I have my 2 pans of chocolate chip meringue cookies ready to go in the oven. I have a 225-degree oven ready for them to go into. It's been preheating since before I started measuring things. And it's important to remember that if these are going in the same oven at the same time, I need to switch shelves about halfway through the baking time. Now the baking time for these is about an hour to an hour and a half. So at about the 30-minute mark, I'm going to switch shelves so that, and then I could always switch them again if they needed, if I felt like they needed a lot more than that first hour. And then they need to cool completely on the baking sheets. So I'm going to go put these in the oven at 225 degrees, and I'm going to set the timer for an hour because we always set the timer for the lowest amount of time on the time range. Because we can always add more time, but we cannot go back and unbake or unburn something because we didn't set the timer, or because we set the timer for too long. So since we scooped these a little bit smaller than the recipe originally called for, they were finished in an hour. And you can see how they came out. They're a little bit puffed up, a little bit larger in size. But for the most part, they stayed in place. They didn't spread as much as some other cookie recipes would. So now they're ready to plate. Now we have our chocolate chip meringues plated and ready to serve. You can see that they're a very unique cookie. They sort of get hollow inside. They have a little bit of chewiness to them. I've heard them referred to, some recipes will call them a cloud cookie. And like I said, I like the mini chocolate chips because it keeps, they stay suspended in the meringue better, so they're all over the cookie instead of just at the bottom. You could experiment with substituting some other flavors. Instead of the vanilla extract, you could try an orange extract or a strawberry extract. You might have to experiment a little bit with proper amounts for those. I would encourage you to double strawberry or orange, but you can also substitute mint, and I would keep that the same amount as vanilla. If you chose to add any different flavors other than vanilla, I would encourage you to add a couple drops of food coloring to match the flavor of your meringue cookie. So here's a basic chocolate chip meringue, nice and fluffy and ready to serve.